Hey guys, welcome back to Star Wars Timeline. My name is Ben, and today I'd like to ask the question: should we compare Star Wars to other television shows and movies? The hotly anticipated The Book of Boba Fett show finally dropped, and where it doesn't disappoint is the fan reactions. We know ourselves, Star Wars fans are very vocal, we're very emotional, and we love the internet to know how we feel about every minute detail of every show, every prop, and every character, and dialogue line, and so forth. In order to make my thoughts feel compact and that I'm staying on the point, I'd like to separate it into three sections. First and foremost, I'd like to talk about the impact of the story. Second, I'd like to talk about the function of art criticism. And third, the critical self-expression. So without further ado, let's jump into it. And guys, please keep in mind, this is just my personal opinion. And the idea here is not to agitate fans or make you guys angry, but have a conversation with you. I want to hear what you have to say. Drop a comment in the video section below. Let me know what you think all about this, and I'll be glad to respond. Anyway, without further ado, let's get into it. First, let's have a look at the impact of story. I think that language as a tool and storytelling as an art form are absolutely essential to our development as a species and also growth of our civilization. Since the dawn of time, when we first climbed from the trees and stood upright bipedal on our own 2 feet, and we looked over the tall grass and tried to identify and sense danger out there, language has been absolutely instrumental. Since the Stone Age, we had these ancient hunters with their spears sitting by the campfire and trying to impart information to their offspring of how to hunt the bison, or their early artists and their cave paintings where they wanted to express how it made them feel looking at these beautiful beasts of burden, the horses, right? Some of the earliest cave paintings show horses. Or during classical period, the Greek pottery talks about the ancient histories, and you look at their relief sculpture, which tells the legends of their favorite mythological heroes. For example, around the Greece, they had different cults, like the cult of Hercules that had his own temple and his own worship that was very imperative for them to impart. During medieval China, you had these scrolls with beautiful ink painting where you would hold the scroll in your hand and you would scroll it like so from one side to the other and see an actual story being told. During the Renaissance, the great painters of the Renaissance had their religious paintings, which obviously talked about these world important biblical events, the story of Jesus Christ and so forth. And of course, during modern time, we have cinema, which united us around the television sets or mobile devices, whatever you watch it on, and we share our global civilization through art of cinema. So I think in conclusion to this, that we have this imperative, we have this subconscious biological need to both tell and hear stories. And to tell a story is to entertain, literally means to hold attention, to teach, to impart information, whether it's a hero's journey or whether it's a documentary, which also is a form of storytelling. Sometimes stories are there to amuse. They're to scare us. Kids at the campfires, they like to be frightened. Or we as adults, we enjoy watching scary movies because they give us that adrenaline rush and that sudden shock, which is not common to our behavior. And sometimes we also need stories. We absolutely must have them to escape reality when your day has been too tough, or God forbid something happens to your loved one, and you just need to hit pause. You need to unplug from reality. You need to escape. You need to pick up your favorite book, check out some Star Wars, go to Dune, whatever it may be, and pass the time that way. I think a beautiful example of how vital, how important storytelling is to us is through Pan's Labyrinth, 2006 Guillermo del Toro movie. A beautiful, beautiful story of a little girl during horrid events of World War II, that her reality was so brutal that she needed to escape and create this fantasy world around her in order to sustain herself and in order for her mind not to completely shatter, that innocent child's mind. So I think that single movie underscores so well how storytelling is important to us as human beings. Next, let's talk about the function of art criticism. Why is it so important that after we finish a book or catch the next episode of a show, or walk off from a movie theater, we always have to analyze our feelings and thoughts, put it all together, and then communicate it to the storyteller, to our family, to friends, go chat with other fans and compare notes with what they thought about it. Why is it so important to do? When first and foremost, it's innovation, and it's absolutely essential. we as audience, as people who need to hear stories, our attention span is only this long, and if you're not grabbing our attention, moving our hearts, if you're not making us laugh or cry, we simply are not going to care. And your story is going to fade into obscurity and no one will ever remember the creator himself. So I think criticism is important because it stimulates the artist, the storyteller, to constantly innovate, push forward, and never be in one place, to continuously master his craft, redefine it, analyze it, see what works, see what doesn't, and understand human psychology, what people gravitate towards. When people express themselves back to the creator, they're kind of signaling to him, hey, this didn't work, or this was nice, I want more of that. This is why the stories of love and death are so important to us when we see movies or read the books. Those two elements, which are a mainstay, a constant of our lives, we fall in love and we die. Those always remain at the core of our psyche, and we will always gravitate towards stories that have them. Maybe when you're a teenager and you're more edgy and sarcastic, it's like, who cares about love? You're speaking out of ignorance. You haven't experienced it before. And after that powerful emotion washes over you, and I was like, oh my God, butterflies. I'm all over the place. Who is this wonderful person that makes me feel so? Then you understand. Then you start gravitating towards those stories, and you understand that it's part of you and it's essential. Also, I think that competition is very important, and criticism fosters that. It's very crucial to a storyteller to learn from his past mistakes, to learn from previous experience, what storytellers before them were creating, and see what works and identify what doesn't and move forward with it. I think they constantly need to strive and try to do better every single time. Even Stephen King says, when he sits down to write his next book, it's terrifying because you don't know where to start. You think you know the craft because you've already written X amount of successful books before, but what's the next in store for you? What's the next kind of story are you going to do? And is it going to be viewed in light of innovation? And wow, this author is still relevant. His story telling is still as poignant and relevant. Or, this author starts repeating himself and he's forgetful and let's not pay attention anymore. And every artist must have an audience that speaks back to him. I think that's important for an artist to understand what the expectations are. For example, a stand-up comedian, right? There's a form of storytelling. And he stands in front of his audience in the crowd and he will tank. He will fail so many times before he perfects his craft and he becomes good, right? That Bill Burr constantly talks about how he failed for years and years, and I think over a decade before his material started resonating with people and he became one of the biggest comics in the country. I think it's very, very important to understand your toolbox and constantly keep it sharp-edged and know what you're working with. You need to develop methodology. You need to understand what stakes are, what tension is, what dramatizations are. All of those pillars, all of those devices, the gears in the machine, they exist. Whether you want to pay attention to them as audience or not, they have been developed. Those concepts took centuries to understand what motivates people, what makes people cry, what makes people laugh. And I think it's a disservice to storytelling art form to say, well, it's just a matter of opinion. Whether a story is good or bad, it's only a matter of opinion. It's all subjective. That's not necessarily true because there has been huge amount of labor invested and huge amount of tears and sweat and even death. Some storytellers would tell their stories, at the threat of being killed off, and they were still doing them, of what works and what doesn't. And it's just not a matter of opinion, but by stating so, you're discarding all the hard work that came before. And I think it's also important for the fans to express their criticism in order to begin to understand what they like. For example, when a person says, well, this scary movie was dumb, I didn't like it, right? It's a very crude way of looking at something. But then 5 movies after you say, this is dumb, I don't like this, you just begin to realize, well, hold on a second. It's not the material itself that is not good. I just don't like horror films. And it's actually true with myself. I don't like horror movies. For exception of few movies, like I really enjoyed Francis Ford Coppola's Bram Stoker's Dracula because, it's a costumed film that is a historical picture, it has a lot of drama, it has love and death themes. But generally, I don't enjoy scary movies. That's not my, avenue. I don't like those films. That is not to say that they're bad. Now, as a fan, I'm able to identify what my temperament is, what I personally am looking from the story, what I like. And as much as I enjoy action movies, I also began to realize with years that either my tastes have changed or I've never paid too much attention to action as much as good story and character. It was always important to me since childhood to have characters and stories that make me feel emotional, that make me feel something, whether angry or root for a character. Or one of my favorite stories was Treasure Island. And those pirates were just nasty. I so wanted the small boy to succeed and get the treasure and get away home unscathed. I felt so emotional during that. So you understand what I like that. So in conclusion, I would like to say that no great piece of art was achieved without adversity in this instance of our conversation, without criticism. I think it's imperative to hear words in your address, maybe sometimes crude words, maybe sometimes harsh and mean words, because they will create something that is much, much better. I think you will, as a storyteller, begin to say, hold on a second, let me improve. Maybe I am really doing something wrong. But it could also create a completely opposite reaction, like was the case with George Lucas, where he became a rebel. And he said, well, hold on a second. This is what people expect from me. This is the social norm with science fiction at the time. I'm going to completely reinvent the formula. But before George Lucas was able to do it, he studied human psychology, he studied humanity courses, he studied mythology, and he understood the formula. He understood the concept of storytelling before he started turning the formula up on its head. And he said, well, hold on a second. The studio executives are telling me I can't do this. They're telling me this story is bad. He was being criticized, and he was at the same time being bolstered by his good friend Steven Spielberg, the example which I'll talk about a little later. But no matter what kind of criticism this is, it will make you more resilient as a storyteller, as a creator. It will make you pay attention to your work and be more alert to what fans are expecting and what's going to work. Because ultimately, art is there to communicate. If you don't have any audience to communicate to, you are forgotten. If you're trying to get a gig, you're trying to get a job, you're out of a job. And if you want a job, and if you want to live on your art, which I think any sensible artist would agree with me, that's selling your art and selling yourself, it's a good thing. You want to be compensated for the amount of labor and effort that you put in, right? But in order to do that, in order to be successful craftsman and an artist, you need to understand what the audience is in order to perfect your own craft. The last point I'd like to talk about today is critical self-expression. How we say things matters. How we treat other people, storytellers, and fans is important. And I think it's very important to distinguish between subjectivity and objectivity. I think one of the most popular common phrases that moviegoers or story fans in general say is, well, I don't like it, it's bad. Mandalorian didn't show enough on Din Djarin's face, it's bad. Or Boba Fett is showing too much of Boba Fett's face, it's bad, I don't like it. And I think it's important to separate and say where your personal preference begins and where subjective good storytelling ends. And I think sometimes how we feel very strongly and deservingly so. It's important and good to have your personal subjective opinion, but sometimes it may not have the impact on the quality of storytelling. Look, I don't like Clockwork Orange. I saw that movie. I think that it's very important to watch. It has its historical importance, but it didn't make me feel good. Intellectually, I understood and I absorbed it, and it was an educationally important film for me to watch, but I'll never see it again. I don't like Scarface. It's a powerful film. Al Pacino is tremendous in that role. You can't knock the script or the music or any aspect of it. In terms of craftsmanship, acting, writing, it's immaculate. But I don't like it. It doesn't make me feel good. It makes me feel bad, especially the ending part of the movie, into the beast, into a monster that he turns into, which some of you will say, well, Ben, this is actually the exact point. I get it. I'm not stupid. I know what storytelling is. I know what the movie is informing me. Or sometimes the Goodfellas. Joe Pesci's character, I can't stand him, and has such a huge emotional impact on me that I just don't enjoy experiencing that. But my objective feelings aside, I recognize these movies are world classics. I recognize that these movies are able to elicit emotions in people. And this is the important thing, is that one of my professors in film school said, so long that the story is not forgotten, it's important, it's relative. If a movie makes you feel upset or angry or happy or joyous, if it evokes any kind of reaction out of you, the author has succeeded. They have accomplished something. There's some kind of energy going on there that may not necessarily be tailored to you as a fan, but it's going to have an army, a whole cult of followers who will support that. You understand what I'm trying to say? Not everything that we observe is tailored or made for us. And I don't think storytelling should be. No story should ever try to cater to everyone. That's why we have diversity. That's why we have genres. That's why you could go to one author or this film director or this particular video game. I don't like strategy games a lot, but other fans do. They can't cope with real-time action sequences, and they get confused when they're playing God of War. There's just too many buttons to press at the same time, and too much timing involved, and it frustrates people. They would rather go and play a strategy video game. So that kind of difference, I think it's important to recognize how we speak, how, especially when we're emotional, and recognizing how much of our interpretation of the story is our own filter, and how much of it will be appreciated by other people out there who are not necessarily sharing the same thoughts and views as you do. Another thing that I hear, very popular expression that people say, well, there's too much dialogue and there's not enough action. And I don't like that. That has to do also with expectations. And I think before we start getting emotional and start getting into fights and bickering with other fans online, or even start, going to Twitter, and you go to official, Star Wars channel on Twitter and start dropping bombs there, you have to understand that particularly our feelings may not have impact on how good or bad the story is. Maybe you expected A from the Book of Boba Fett and it's delivering B. Maybe you've read your favorite story in the comic books, in old school Marvel, or during the Legends series, the Bounty Hunter Wars books that I'm reading right now, and you had a certain expectation, but then the showrunners and Jon Favreau and the rest of the creative team wasn't tapping into that for inspiration. They may recognize it, they may have read. We don't understand or know what happens behind the curtains, right? What motivates those people? Maybe there's some budget limitations or execution or different sources of inspiration, or a different methodology of how they're approaching it. They want to execute the show in a particular way in terms of timing and scheduling. There's so many moving pieces and elements there that dictates how the story is told. And we as audience, we don't have all the cards. We don't see what is happening there. We only see the end result. And sometimes when we say, look, that's bad dialogue, there's not enough action, I don't like it, I think a fan could be retrospective and say, well, this is how I personally felt about it. And it doesn't give you a pass to go out there and say that when other people express something differently, that they're wrong and you're right. For example, today I posted a meme where I put all the Power Rangers with the robot in the background on superimposed onto the Boba Fett poster, and I just dropped it as a funny meme. And some of the fans' reactions were, well, wait, stop being toxic, it's enough of that. This joke is not funny anymore. Again, it's people are coming into it with a certain expectation that I somehow want to trash the show or feel bad about it and make you feel bad about it. Sometimes it could be something entirely different and just people poking fun and having a merry time. And sometimes it's okay to criticize something and laugh about it and make jokes about it. That's also an interesting exchange, as long as you're not punishing other fans or being nasty with them in terms of your language, in terms of the way you express yourselves, just because people feel strongly and completely differently about something that you do. Look, some fans consider the Book of Boba Fett show phenomenal. I'm not here in this particular video to express how I feel about it, but I think it's important to recognize that other people feel differently from the way I do, right? And that creates for stronger critical self-expression, and I think it builds a stronger relationship within the fandom. I think we need to separate and understand our first impulsive reactions towards something. You just saw a movie, and then you want to quickly run to the internet and record a 2-hour movie or write a 25,000-page report how Disney ruined Star Wars, you know? I think that it's the hardest thing to separate ourselves from, because that's what storytelling is trying to accomplish. Evoke emotion. How do you separate yourself from it? I think if you start informing yourself and start breaking stories down into genre or stylistic choices or what kind of demographic it is. Obviously, the Book of Boba Fett is not geared towards Shakespeare fans, right? It's not trying to be high Sopranos drama. It has a completely different demographic. It has a completely different approach to storytelling. It's on Disney Plus, and I think taking all of those elements into account, it's important to criticism. You know, you can't measure the Book of Boba Fett by the same ruler we measure Dune. It's just not fair. I think we can and should criticize both of those, and we can compare them, but based on their own merit of the power of storytelling. You can't compare, you know, Goodfellas to something like The Fifth Element. They're two completely, entirely different genres, two completely different movies that are trying to accomplish two different things. So you can't compare them in the sense, well, like, yeah, that's a better crime drama when Fifth Element is actually a blockbuster, you know, actioner movie. So it's not comparable. But you compare them and say, well, hold on a second. I thought that this character arc was more powerfully built here, but that comedic scene that Fifth Element was trying to accomplish in that particular scene was also very effective. So you can understand the tool set. You can understand and inform yourself as an audience about what makes up a great story and judge and compare both pieces of art, which are entirely different based on their own merit, and say, well, within the context of this film, this really worked. But within the context of this show, that didn't work. I think this was done better here than it was done better here. Hey, hold on a second. Fifth Element is brimming with practical effects, right? The Force Awakens is also a movie has huge practical effects. I'm not being too fair in making this point because actually both sci-fi, space opera kind of films, but, well, not necessarily space opera in terms of Fifth Element, but both are action-packed sci-fi films. But you could compare them just in that term and say, well, hold on a second. I think the practical effects here were done much better. Or I'm really interested to know how they accomplished those little huge robots in the Fifth Element over there. So you can still make comparisons within the frame of understanding the differences of genre, understanding the differences of style, demographic, and all of the different elements. And I think encouragement versus toxicity also should be recognized. You know, when you say something like, I hate it, it sucks, you know, Kathleen Kennedy ruined Star Wars, you know, all of these baseless accusations that we simply don't have enough evidence for, and it's at best speculation. You go and watch an angry YouTube video and say, well, this guy said that, and reaffirms its confirmation bias. It reaffirms how I felt about this piss poor film, and that's got to be the truth. That's what's really happening. Versus constructive criticism, which I think adds more value to both the storyteller, the creator, and to the fandom in general. Because, look, sometimes we all fail, and it's not a good thing to come to somebody who is already feels bad about something that they failed at and push them off the cliff. Give you this perfect example, the pros of being constructive in your criticism, is that we all fail sometimes, and we need encouragement. And, you know, when Steven Spielberg filmed his 1941 movie, it was just trashed by critics. It flopped. He felt terrible about it. He didn't want to make cinema anymore. He said, my career is done. You know, he's a young, talented director who's very emotional about his work, and it was just crashed and burned. And his fellow friend, George Lucas, came at him. He said, look, forget about this. Move on. Let me throw a script at you you might be interested in. And that's how Indiana Jones was born. Encouragement. Perhaps there were some words exchanged between the two and said, maybe this was not done the right way. But you're a talented guy. You're an amazing guy. Push forward. Continue. You could do this. And obviously, you know, Steven Spielberg's career not only recovered, but he became one of the greatest film directors of all time. Once again. And in reverse, the same kind of encouragement worked where George Lucas had this very difficult time filming the original 1977 film, and he's constantly behind schedule and the budget limitations and constantly bickering with the studio executives. Steven Spielberg was the one to hold him back, and he said, like, not hold him back, I'm sorry, to get his back, and it's like, hey, I'm behind you on this. I think this is something extraordinary. You're doing something wonderful. Keep on doing this. These guys just don't see it. And boom. And Star Wars was a story of how it was almost never made, and then it was made into cultural phenomenon overnight. But there's also a counter side to that as well. Sometimes we need to hear harsh criticism. I think that people produced their best works, they're most motivated when they're going against the stream, when they're going against adversity. And once again, it's George Lucas's work that he started creating as independent filmmaker, and Star Wars became his baby. He built his own empire. He went against Hollywood status quo, and he created a series of films in the way that he wanted to, with the original trilogy and also with prequels, which has an army of fans of. None of this would have happened if probably George Lucas didn't have such a hard time creating his original film. You know, when you're in your comfort zone, when you're all happy, and it's like, oh, I'm just waiting for my muse, for things to happen, that's not it. Most of the talented film directors or storytellers or writers, they will tell your stories how much of a hard time they had creating their best works. And I think that a lack of criticism sometimes is also harmful, detrimental. While we should be eloquent with the way we express criticism, it is absolutely imperative to the work of art. And again, I'm stepping on the sacred ground here, but I'm talking about the Star Wars prequels. I think personally those movies were trying to tell a very good, strong story, and George Lucas's heart was in the right place, but he isolated himself from creative criticism. He would not have anyone else ever again tell him how to make cinema. And even the people who helped him create these series of films, the people at ALM, and you could watch a Star Wars prequel behind the scenes making of, and you will see how George Lucas is adamant about this piece. He always insisted upon that Jar Jar was funny and was a good character. And I think honestly that when George Lucas tried to defend those films and say like, well, I make movies for children, it's my opinion. I could be entirely wrong, but I think he heard so much negative, harsh criticism, unjustified criticism from fans that it was his only coping mechanism to try to defend those movies. Because obviously prequels movies are riddled with politics. They have complex subplots and story elements going on there, and try to convince me that Revenge of the Sith is a children's movie when we see its main protagonist turned into an evil man and literally burned down next to a lava pool. I don't know how much of it is a children's movie. And not just visually, not the shocking stuff, the themes, the transformation of a hero. I don't know. I don't buy that defense from George Lucas. I think it came off on the heels of very negative and bad criticism. Fans just trashed it. And I remember that time very well of watching of The Phantom Menace in 1999, and I just felt that most of the criticism was too harsh. A lot of it was founded, myself included. I was criticizing it, but the way that it was expressed was very, very harsh. So in conclusion, the final question that I have is, well, we are Star Wars fans. We're obviously not professional critics. So when you get into it with another fan, how do we know when the story is good? How do we know who is right? Who has the right argument? You know, is Benjamin versus John Doe? How do I know that my points have merit versus that person? And without resorting once again to the mean words and curse words and, you know, verbal violence, how do we understand that the story is good? And I think good critique and good understanding comes with studying world classics. I think when you look at the larger picture of storytelling, when you look at stories that endured the test of time since antiquity into the modern day, that made the most impact with audience around the world, when you look at theology and mythology, when you look at characters like Egyptian god Osiris, who kind of was a progenitor of the Christ figure, of a resurrection of the god, which we see obviously in Scandinavian mythology with Balder, and also we see in Christian theology with Jesus Christ. We look at epic poems and mythology with Homer's Iliad and Odyssey. We'll look at Norse gods like Odin and Ragnarok. Why do all of these stories endure and stay with us and are being reinvented and retold through anime, through video games, through comic books? And when you look at literature like Robert Heinlein's Starship Troopers, which obviously inspired the entire Marines in space genre, with Halo video game series, with Warhammer 40K franchises. When you look at Victor Hugo's Hunchback of Notre Dame and Shakespearean's Romeo and Juliet, why are these stories of love and death and redemption and spirituality are so important to us? I think once you begin to inform yourself and ask that question, you begin to resolve it. And when you confront another fan who may not necessarily share your worldview, you may at the very least come away and say, well, at least I understand the background. I understand where this is coming from. And this person actually had a valid point, which we stated here. Or I don't know if it's arrogant or not to believe, sometimes you walk away from an argument and you don't tap into negative, toxic language, but you say, you know what, I think I'm better informed because I studied my mythology, I studied my history. I think my opinion, is valid. It's important to me. And then again, you may compare it against someone else and relate your opinion to your close friend that you trust, and they may disagree once again and bring something also equally valued and opposite to that conversation. Anyway, guys, this was my conversation with you here. I would love to hear your thoughts. I would love to hear what you have to say. I think that it's very important to compare works of art. I think it's very important to look at different shows and movies and compare them on their own merits. It doesn't necessarily have to be within the same genre, within the same style. You could identify the differences and analyze a story within its own framework, within its own style, within its own demographic, and compare it to something else. Because at the end of the day, powerful storytelling elements are universal. They're unanimous. And the point I want to get across to support my argument is the story of love and death. Those two will always remain the mainstay. From Warhammer 40K to Zelda to whatever you name it. I loved the Breath of the Wild video game, and I loved to see the destruction of the world before the hero once again is resurrected to come and restore the world and, the goodness prevail. Anyway, guys, please drop your comments in the section below. I would love to have the conversation with you. I'd love to hear your opinions. Talk about the Book of Boba Fett. Talk about your other favorite shows that you're watching right now. I'm currently started watching The Arcane, something that my brother and my animation friends were telling me to see, and I'm completely being blown away by this. And of course, I will be comparing it and sizing it up next to the Book of Boba Fett and the Bad Batch and all the great material that comes on. Today is a great day to be a Star Wars fan, because not only we're getting a huge amount of material coming out, we'll all get to participate in it. We all get to sit down, share our thoughts, and we can all do it, I think, with respect to the people who put their heart and souls into the material, and also respecting other fans and their points of view at the same time. Anyway, guys, if you enjoyed this video, please consider supporting me. Hit that bell button, subscribe so you don't miss my future podcasts, and I'll see you next time. Take care.